Honoring Our Fallen Officers. Alabama. Part 1. Alabama City Police Department. Patrolman William Patterson lost his life in the line of duty on January 1, 1912. He was shot and killed by a man he had arrested earlier in the day for being drunk in public. When the suspect, who was the son of a fellow police officer, was released from jail, he confronted Patrolman Patterson and shot him. The man was convicted of first-degree murder and died in prison in 1913. Patrolman William Patterson was 39 years old and had been on the force for only 2 months. Albertville Police Department. Detective Ernest Whitten died January 25, 1995. He was shot when he answered a knock at his back door. A suspect Detective Whitten was investigating hired 2 hit men to kill him. Whitten survived long enough to identify his killers. All 3 men were convicted of murder. Detective Whitten was 36 years old. Alexander City Police Department. Patrolman Clarence Martin died January 6, 1976. He was ambushed and shot while sitting in his patrol car. The suspect was a man he had recently ticketed for driving without a license. Patrolman Martin was 44 years old and had been on the force 2 years. Patrolman Reuben Millam died July 4, 1976. He suffered a fatal heart attack while struggling to arrest a suspect. Once back inside his patrol car, he slumped over the steering wheel. Patrolman Millam was 58 years old and had been with the force 23 years. Andalusia Police Department, Alabama. Sergeant David Campbell died July 27, 1984. He perished when his patrol car was hit head-on. Sergeant Campbell, his partner, and a civilian ride-along were rounding a curve when the accident occurred. The patrol car burst into flames. Several pedestrians were injured as they pulled the officers from the burning car. Sergeant Campbell was 32 years old. Anniston Police Department. Officer John Cunningham died June 25, 1911. He was shot while assisting other officers in a search for a man that had earlier shot and wounded the chief of police and the county sheriff. The suspect was convicted of second-degree murder and sent to a convict work camp where he later died when a load of rocks fell on him. Officer Cunningham was 32 years old and had been on the force 7 years. Officer S.C. Zahner died September 3, 1911. He was shot while trying to break up the illegal sale of liquor at a local saloon. Officer Zahner was 55 years old. Chief of Police Harry Sheretsky died May 23, 1914. He was shot by a moonshiner. The suspect was then shot by another officer on scene. Chief Sheretsky was 28 years old and had been on the force 7 years. Officer J.W. Dashwood died September 12, 1914. Officer Dashwood and Officer Will Dillard were shot while raiding an illegal liquor establishment. The suspect was convicted of both murders and was hanged. Officer Dashwood was 45 years old. Officer Will Dillard died September 12, 1914. Officer Dillard and Officer J.W. Dashwood were shot while raiding an illegal liquor establishment. The suspect was convicted of both murders and hanged. Officer Dillard was 42 years old. Officer Jack Holland died December 22, 1914. Shortly after midnight, Officer Holland arrested a drunk man at a house of ill repute. As Officer Holland was escorting the man to jail, one of the man's friends ambushed Officer Holland. A shootout ensued. Officer Holland succumbed to his wounds the next day. Officer Clarence Kettles died February 1, 1915. He and Officer Marion Screws were both killed in a shootout with a suspect. Officer Kettles was 39 years old. Officer Marion Screws died February 1, 1915. He and Officer Clarence Kettles were killed in a shootout with a suspect. Officer Screws was 31 years old. Officer Joe Holliday died April 26, 1922. He and Officer Bryce Hurst were shot by a fellow police officer during an argument. The other officer claimed self-defense but was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Officer Holliday was 29 years old. Officer Bryce Hurst died April 26, 1922. He and Officer Joe Holliday were shot by a fellow police officer during an argument. The other officer claimed self-defense but was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Officer Hurst was 31 years old. Officer Robert Draper died January 27, 1927. He was accidentally shot when a confiscated firearm discharged while inside the Anniston Police Department. Officer Draper was 23 years old. Officer Grady Todd died August 1, 1936. His police motorcycle was hit by a car while he was pursuing a suspect running liquor. Officer Todd was 30 years old and had been on the force for only 3 weeks. Officer Hoyt Holder died May 22, 1938. He was shot by a murder suspect he was attempting to arrest. The suspect was sentenced to life in prison but was paroled in 1948 after serving 10 years. Officer Holder was 42 years old and had been on the force for 1 year. Officer Ralph Griffin died June 22, 1954. He was stabbed while working an off-duty security job at a local speedway. While Officer Griffin was struggling with a man, the man's brother came up behind him and stabbed him multiple times. His killer was sentenced to life in prison but was paroled in 1963. Officer Griffin was 45 years old and had been on the force 12 years. Officer Justin Salohub died August 25, 2011. He was shot while in a foot pursuit of a suspect. The suspect was convicted and sentenced to death. Officer Salohub was 27 years old and had been on the force 2 years. Arab Police Department. Night Policeman William Coleman died August 14, 1943. The previous day, Officer Coleman arrested a man for driving recklessly. The next day, the man and several family members located Officer Coleman. They ambushed him and shot him outside a local pool hall. Officer Coleman was 72 years old and had been on the force 35 years.